Jessica Chandler's story is one that strikes at the very heart of what we think we know about love, motherhood, and protection. A young mother in Tennessee, Jessica appeared to be like many others, dedicated to her two children, working hard to provide for them despite the challenges life threw her way. But behind closed doors, Jessica was grappling with an inner turmoil that would lead her to commit an act so chilling, so incomprehensible, that it left an entire nation in shock. This isn't just a story about a crime, it's a story about the unthinkable. A mother, the person meant to protect her children from harm, accused of ending their lives in the most horrifying way imaginable. And the most haunting part, Jessica believed she was saving them. In her mind, the world had become so dangerous, so overwhelming, that the only way to protect her children was to take them out of it. What could drive a mother to such a dark place? What whispers of desperation and fear could drown out a parent's instinct to nurture and protect? Jessica's story begins in a small, quiet town in Tennessee, a place where neighbors still greet each other, and life moves at a slower pace. To the outside world, Jessica seemed like a loving mother trying to do her best. Friends and acquaintances describe her as reserved but attentive, someone who adored her kids and always put them first. But behind the surface, Jessica was struggling. Financial pressures weighed heavily on her, and she battled deep feelings of inadequacy and fear. She worried constantly about her ability to provide for her children and keep them safe, fears that eventually grew into something far more dangerous. The weeks leading up to the tragedy are now seen as critical pieces of the puzzle, clues that might have signaled the storm brewing inside Jessica. She became increasingly withdrawn, avoiding friends and family and shutting herself off from the world. Her social media posts, once filled with pictures of her smiling children, became cryptic and sparse. She confided in no one, leaving those closest to her in the dark about the depths of her despair. On the day of the crime, Jessica's actions were deliberate, methodical, and in her mind, justified. Investigators later pieced together the events of that day, painting a picture of a mother consumed by fear and driven by an unsettling sense of duty. Jessica used a Lilo and Stitch blanket, an object her children likely associated with comfort and love, as the tool to end their lives. The juxtaposition of something so innocent being used in such a horrifying way adds a chilling layer to the story, a detail that lingers in the minds of anyone who hears it. But Jessica didn't stop there. After the act was done, she left handwritten notes at the scene, confessions written in her own hand, offering a glimpse into the depths of her mind. "I couldn't keep them safe," one note read. "The world is too dangerous. This was the only way." These words, so simple yet so heavy, provide a haunting insight into Jessica's mindset. She wasn't just confessing to a crime, she was explaining it, justifying it to herself and to the world. When authorities arrived at Jessica's home, the scene they encountered was something out of a nightmare. The lifeless bodies of her children lay still, carefully covered, as though Jessica believed this act of care could somehow soften what she had done. Nearby, the Lilo and Stitch blanket was found, an innocent item forever tainted by its use in such a violent act. Investigators described the scene as haunting, a moment that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Jessica's arrest sent shockwaves through her small community. Neighbors who had known her for years struggled to reconcile the image of a loving mother with the horrifying details of her crime. The question on everyone's mind was the same. How could this happen? How could a mother turn against her own children? And why? The media quickly picked up on the story, with headlines screaming about the Lilo and Stitch killer. News outlets dissected every detail, from Jessica's handwritten notes to her apparent belief that she was protecting her children. The story captivated and horrified viewers, not just because of the crime itself, but because of the questions it raised about mental health, motherhood, and the thin line between love and destruction. What drove Jessica to this breaking point? Was it untreated mental illness, overwhelming fear, or something darker, something that even she couldn't fully understand? These are the questions that make Jessica Chandler's story so chilling. And as we dive deeper into the details, the answers may leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature and the bond between a parent and child. When investigators began piecing together the details of what happened in Jessica Chandler's home, the true horror of the crime began to take shape. The evidence they uncovered painted a picture of a mother consumed by fear and despair, but whose actions defied all understanding. It wasn't just the crime itself that shocked the community. It was the cold, deliberate nature of how it was carried out and the heartbreaking evidence left behind. Jessica used her children's favorite blanket, a Lilo and Stitch comforter that had once been a symbol of their innocence and joy, to commit the unthinkable. Investigators determined that Jessica had waited until the children were asleep or in a vulnerable state before she acted. The blanket, a gift from a happier time, became the tool of their demise. The deliberate choice of such a familiar and beloved object added a deeply unsettling element to the crime. It was as though Jessica wanted to shield her children from fear, even as she was ending their lives. The scene investigators walked into was one of eerie stillness. Jessica had carefully covered her children's lifeless bodies, as though trying to preserve some semblance of dignity in an act that had already stripped them of their lives. Nearby, the handwritten notes Jessica had left offered chilling glimpses into her state of mind. These weren't hastily written confessions. They were carefully composed, almost methodical, as though Jessica believed she owed the world an explanation. "I couldn't protect them," one note read. "The world is cruel, and I couldn't let it hurt them." Forensic teams combed through the house, searching for answers that might explain why a mother would commit such a heinous act. They found signs of Jessica's deteriorating mental health scattered throughout her home. Bills left unpaid, letters from social services, and personal journals revealed a woman on the brink of collapse. In her writings, Jessica expressed a deep fear of the world and an overwhelming sense of inadequacy. She wrote about feeling trapped, about being unable to provide for her children, and about a growing paranoia that danger was closing in around them. One journal entry written just days before the murders stood out to investigators. "I feel like I'm failing them," Jessica had written. "Every day it gets harder to keep them safe. I hear the news and it's all violence and pain. I can't let that happen to them. If I can't protect them, who will?" These words offered a haunting glimpse into Jessica's mindset, a woman who believed, however twisted it might seem, that her actions were an act of love. When Jessica was taken into custody, her demeanor was unsettling. She wasn't hysterical or defensive. She spoke calmly, answering investigators' questions with a chilling detachment. She admitted to the crime without hesitation, repeating the same sentiment found in her notes and journals. "I couldn't protect them. I didn't have a choice." Her tone, so devoid of emotion, sent chills through the room. It was as though she truly believed that what she had done was not just necessary, but right. As the case moved forward, the community struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. Friends and neighbors who had known Jessica for years were in disbelief. "She loved those kids," one neighbor said. "She was quiet, sure, but you could see how much she cared for them. She'd walk them to the bus stop every morning and she always had a smile for them. I can't understand how this happened." Others expressed anger, condemning Jessica for what they saw as an unforgivable betrayal of her role as a mother. "She was supposed to protect them," another said. "How could she do this to her own children?" The media latched onto the story, and it quickly became national news. Headlines screamed about the Lilo and Stitch killer, drawing attention to the chilling detail of the blanket used in the crime. News outlets dissected Jessica's notes and journals, offering armchair analyses of her mental state. Was she a victim of untreated mental illness, or was she simply a monster hiding in plain sight? The debates raged on, with psychologists and commentators weighing in on the complexities of her case. The public reaction was just as polarized. Social media lit up with discussions about Jessica's actions, with some expressing sympathy for the struggles she faced and others calling for the harshest possible punishment. "Mental illness isn't an excuse for murder," one commenter wrote. "Those kids didn't deserve this. She deserves to rot in prison." Another countered, "This is what happens when we fail to support struggling parents. She didn't need punishment, she needed help, and no one gave it to her." As the trial approached, Jessica's defense team began building their case. They focused heavily on her mental health, arguing that she was suffering from severe depression and paranoia that clouded her judgment. They brought in mental health experts to testify about Jessica's deteriorating state of mind, pointing to her journals and notes as evidence of her delusional thinking. One psychologist described her as a woman who saw no way out, who genuinely believed that her actions were the only way to protect her children. But the prosecution was relentless. They emphasized the deliberate nature of Jessica's actions, arguing that she had planned the murders and carried them out with full awareness of what she was doing. They highlighted the chilling details of the crime, from the choice of the blanket to the calm demeanor she displayed when confessing. "This wasn't a crime of passion," the prosecutor said. "This was a calculated, deliberate act of violence against two innocent children." In the courtroom, Jessica sat silently, her face unreadable. The weight of the crime hung heavily in the air, and every detail presented by the prosecution or defense only deepened the sense of tragedy. For the children's family members, the trial was an excruciating reminder of what they had lost. Jessica's own mother spoke during the proceedings, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know what happened to her," she said. "This isn't the daughter I raised, but those babies didn't deserve this. They were so full of life." The case became a lightning rod for debates about mental health, motherhood, and justice. Could Jessica's actions be attributed solely to her mental illness, or was there something deeper at play? Should her struggles have been caught earlier, and if so, could this tragedy have been prevented? The questions were as endless as they were heartbreaking, leaving the community and the nation grappling with the aftermath of a crime that defied understanding. As Jessica Chandler's trial unfolded, the courtroom became a battleground of emotions, arguments, and heartache. The prosecution was determined to prove that Jessica had deliberately and methodically murdered her children, while the defense worked to paint a picture of a mother consumed by mental illness, driven to commit the unthinkable by forces beyond her control. Every testimony, every piece of evidence brought with it a new wave of shock, sadness, and anger as the case captured the attention of the nation. The prosecution's case was built on the cold, hard facts of what Jessica had done. They meticulously laid out the timeline of events, from the weeks leading up to the murders to the crime itself. They presented her handwritten notes as evidence of her calculated intent, pointing to the detailed way she had articulated her fears and rationale. This wasn't an impulsive act, the prosecutor argued. This was a decision she made, a plan she carried out. She had time to stop, to reconsider, to seek help, but instead she chose to end the lives of two innocent children. Forensic experts testified about the crime scene, describing how Jessica had used the Lilo and Stitch blanket to strangle her children. The blanket, once a comforting presence in their lives, had become an instrument of violence. The prosecution emphasized the deliberateness of this choice, arguing that it showed Jessica's intent to shield her children from fear, while simultaneously taking their lives. It was a disturbing detail that left the courtroom silent, the weight of it settling heavily on everyone present. The defense, however, painted a very different picture of Jessica. They called on mental health professionals to testify about her severe depression, paranoia, and delusional thinking. One expert described Jessica as a woman trapped in a downward spiral, overwhelmed by fear, and convinced that the world posed an imminent threat to her children. They argued that Jessica's notes were not evidence of premeditation, but of a distorted mind trying to rationalize an irrational act. In her mind, she believed she was saving them, her attorney said. She believed she was protecting them from a world she saw as cruel and dangerous. Jessica herself was largely silent throughout the trial, her expression unreadable. When she did speak, it was with a calm, detached tone that many found unsettling. She didn't deny what she had done. Instead, she repeated the same sentiment found in her notes and journals. I couldn't keep them safe. Her lack of visible emotion was interpreted in different ways. To some, it was a sign of her mental instability. To others, it was evidence of her cold-heartedness. The most emotional moments of the trial came from the family members of Jessica and her children. Jessica's mother, visibly shaken, took the stand to speak about her daughter's struggles and the devastating loss of her grandchildren. She loved those kids, she said through tears. I don't know what happened to her. I don't know how it got to this point. But I do know she wasn't in her right mind. She would never have done this if she were. Her words were a plea for understanding, but they also underscored the depth of the tragedy. The children's father, who had been estranged from Jessica, spoke with anger and heartbreak. Those kids were my world, he said. And now they're gone because their mother thought she had the right to play God. She had options. She could have asked for help, but instead, she made a choice that can never be undone. His words were a stark reminder of the ripple effects of Jessica's actions, the pain extending far beyond the lives lost. As the trial progressed, the media coverage intensified. Every new detail, every piece of testimony was dissected and debated on news programs and social media. Headlines described Jessica as everything from a monstrous killer to a tragic figure failed by society. The polarized opinions fueled heated discussions, with some arguing that her mental illness was no excuse, and others pointing to systemic failures that left her without the support she needed. The jury's deliberation was long and intense, reflecting the complexity of the case. They had to weigh Jessica's mental health against the severity of her actions to decide whether her illness absolved her of responsibility or if the deliberate nature of the crime demanded accountability. After days of deliberation, the verdict was announced. Guilty. Jessica Chandler was convicted of first-degree murder for the deaths of her children. During sentencing, the judge delivered a powerful statement. Addressing Jessica directly, he said, "Your actions have taken 2 innocent lives, leaving a void that can never be filled. While I acknowledge the struggles you faced, it is my duty to hold you accountable for the choice you made, a choice that robbed the world of 2 beautiful souls." Jessica was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that brought a mix of relief and sorrow to those who had followed the case. The aftermath of the trial left the community grappling with the tragedy and its implications. Vigils were held to honor the memory of Jessica's children, with neighbors, friends, and strangers gathering to mourn the loss of 2 young lives taken far too soon. Candles were lit, prayers were said, and photos of the children were displayed, their smiling faces a painful reminder of what had been lost. The case also sparked broader conversations about mental health and the resources available to struggling parents. Advocates called for greater awareness and support systems, arguing that Jessica's tragedy could have been prevented if she had received the help she needed. This isn't just about one mother's breakdown, one advocate said. It's about a society that too often overlooks the struggles of parents, especially those dealing with mental illness. We need to do better. As you hear this story, what are your thoughts? Was Jessica's sentence fair, or should her mental health struggles have played a larger role in her defense? Could this tragedy have been prevented if she had received more support, or were her actions beyond justification? What do you believe justice looks like in a case as complex and heartbreaking as this? Share your opinions in the comments below. Let's discuss what this case says about our justice system, our approach to mental health, and the responsibilities we all share in supporting those who are struggling. This story is a tragedy, but it's also an opportunity to learn, to reflect, and to work toward a world where no parent feels as though they have no other choice. As we come to the end of this heartbreaking case, we are left with more questions than answers. The tragic deaths of Jessica Chandler's children have shaken not just her family and friends, but also the entire community, leaving a permanent scar. But beyond the devastating nature of this crime lies a broader conversation that is often swept under the rug: the intersection of mental health, personal responsibility, and societal failure. The crime itself is horrifying. There's no way to sugarcoat it. A mother who should have been the protector of her children took their lives with a chilling, calculated demeanor. The detail of using a beloved Lilo and Stitch blanket as the instrument of their deaths adds a haunting layer to the crime. It's almost as if Jessica's love for her children was twisted into something unrecognizable, something dark and dangerous. But while the crime is monstrous, we cannot ignore the factors that led Jessica to commit this act. Was she a monster, or was she a victim of her own untreated mental illness? Jessica's case has sparked heated debates and drawn widespread media attention. Some argue that no amount of mental illness can justify the murder of two innocent children, while others contend that her mental health struggles were a critical factor in understanding her actions. The jury ultimately convicted her of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Many believe this is the only way to deliver justice. After all, those children were unable to live out their lives, and their mother took that away from them. But can we really hold someone fully accountable for their actions when they're suffering from a severe mental disorder? And what about Jessica's own struggles? Could more have been done to intervene before it was too late? Jessica's family, including her mother, has been left torn between the grief of losing her children and the confusion of how someone they loved could do something so incomprehensible. How does a mother, one who, by all accounts, loved her children deeply, end up in a situation where she believes that murder is the only way to protect them? Is this a failure of our mental health system, where untreated depression, paranoia, and delusions can snowball into something catastrophic? Could someone have stepped in to offer help before it reached this point? These are tough questions to answer, but they are questions we all must grapple with if we are to prevent future tragedies. It's important to look beyond the headlines, the sensationalized details of the case, and to ask, how can we help those like Jessica before it's too late? Mental illness is a silent crisis in many families. It's a crisis that often goes unnoticed until something terrible happens. And while the system may be designed to protect society, it is equally important to protect those who are suffering, especially when they are vulnerable and unable to see the full consequences of their actions. So, what happens now? Can we look at this case and find a way to prevent something similar from happening again? How do we balance justice with compassion for those who are mentally ill? What can we do to make sure that when a parent like Jessica is struggling, they don't feel as if they are left with no other choice? These are questions that only society can answer. And in order to truly address the issues at the heart of Jessica Chandler's tragedy, we need to be brave enough to have the difficult conversations about mental health, support systems, and our collective responsibility to those who are suffering. Jessica's story is, in many ways, a reflection of our own fears and failures. It's a story that serves as a reminder of the importance of mental health resources, community outreach, and early intervention. The more we talk about it, the more we can work toward solutions before it's too late. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about Jessica Chandler's case? Do you think her mental health struggles should have played a bigger role in her sentence? Was the sentence of life in prison without parole justified? Or was there another way to address her crime and her condition? Should the community have done more to support her before it came to this? How can we, as a society, prevent something like this from happening again? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going and open a dialogue about mental health and responsibility. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. By subscribing, you join a community where we tackle real-life issues and strive to learn from them. Together, we can reflect on stories like Jessica's, learn from them, and work toward a future where such tragedies are prevented and people receive the help they need before it's too late. Thank you for joining us today, and remember, No matter how dark the topic, the more we talk about it, the more we can make a difference. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.